What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're talking about the long-awaited Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Written and directed by James Gunn once again, and for the final time, this film stars people like Chris Pratt, Bradley Cooper, Dave Bautista, Karen Gillan, Vin Diesel, Pom Klementieff, as well as many others, and tells the finale to this iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So I'm going to start this off by saying that this will be a spoiler-free review. I won't be getting into the plot or any of the real big details that this story in this movie really focuses on, because a lot of the marketing outside of visuals and a lot of the hype leading up to it and small moments that can kind of allude to things has been kind of bare when it comes to what the actual plot synopsis of this film is. And I'm sure you can find plenty of videos at this point that have spoilers and different things like that, but in case you're somebody who views my channel and enjoys that I don't really talk about spoilers, I'm going to stay a little bit vague when it comes to the overall premise and just talk more about what this movie kind of means more to me. And when the Guardians of the Galaxy first movie was announced all that time ago, which almost a decade ago now, it's kind of crazy to me that it's been that much time. I was absolutely thrilled, because while these characters were obscure to so many, these were actually characters that I really enjoyed in the comic books, and it was a comic book line that I remember discovering specifically because somebody told me that it was kind of like Star Wars in Marvel. So then we finally get the movie, and I was at least aware of them because I had read many comics of theirs at that point, and then we get the movie and it was exactly that, Star Wars in Marvel. So for quite some time it was my favorite film in the MCU. At this point I don't really know what my favorite in the MCU is anymore. There's just so many projects that definitely, you know, are some of my favorites in the genre overall that are within this franchise in itself. And yeah, that first film though still is easily within my top 5. I love the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and when it comes to the second one, I liked it. I thought it was a good time, but I definitely thought it was a dip down. I felt like a lot of the humor was a little bit overwhelming when it came to kind of distracting from the overall emotion of the story at times. I still enjoy the film, but not nearly as much as the original film. And here we are now. This was the one that they announced was going to be James Gunn's final film directing this franchise, and that it was going to be a change up of the lineup, that this would be the final film with the current iteration of the Guardians. And for anybody who's not familiar, the lineup has changed on countless occasions over the course of the comic books, even at one point including characters like Iron Man, which I did at one point expect we would finally get, but of course we know that that did not happen. So what are my thoughts now on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? I had a blast with this movie. This is easily one of my favorite films of the year so far. I was completely emotionally gripped, and you know, in a world where a lot of people have been down on Marvel, while I've enjoyed everything that's come out in Phase 4 and all the way up to this point, without a doubt, when I think about the highlights after something like Endgame, No Way Home and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 are definitely going to be some of the highlights when it comes to the films that have come out after Endgame. There's other great films that have come out, like Shang-Chi, I really enjoyed as well, but as far as emotional stakes with characters that we're already connected to, yeah, I think that this film hit the nail right on the head. This isn't a film that's going to be loaded with cameos and all these different MCU connections, more so than it is a film that really has a personal story that's centered on our characters. And I think that that's what I really enjoyed about this film. In a lot of ways, it feels like a lot of the projects that have come out recently, while enjoyable to me, have felt a lot more about connecting pieces and kind of moving chess pieces across the board all around to set up the future of the MCU, often kind of relying on things like cameos or a lot of references to the things that have already happened in previous installments to kind of flesh out the narrative. And while that isn't always the case, it is something that they've definitely relied on. On top of that, we've had a lot of really over-the-top humor in some of the more recent things that at times has taken away from the overall stakes and emotion of the story. And I think that this film harkens back to earlier Marvel, where you do have that ability to have a lot of humor that gets a lot of laughs from the audience, but never overbears the actual plot of the story. It never takes over and kind of distracts you from the emotion of the narrative. And when we look at this film, I thought that this movie was emotional, it was impactful, it was epic in its action. It had a fantastic use of digital and practical effects, as well as great costume design and set design. There was plenty of laughs throughout, plenty of great humor, a lot of great banter between all the characters of the Guardians, whether it be in a lighthearted, fun way, or or in a way where they're really having character development and growth. And one of the things I enjoyed about this film most was the central theme of understanding. This is a film that very much focuses on the idea of people who like to control others, like to control others' beings, who they are and what they are, because they don't align with what they want them to be. And I think that not only do we see that mainly with our main villain here, the High Evolutionary, but we also see it here with our main characters, as many times they want to kind of mold one another into what kind of works for them, or they want them to see things the way that the other person sees things. And the central theme of this film in a lot of ways is understanding, is seeing where somebody's come from, and is accepting one another for who we are versus who we want each other to be. And that was something that I definitely related to in this film. That's definitely the core of the film in a lot of ways, and the thing that I found the most impactful. But I think something that most people know going into this movie, if you've seen any of the marketing, if you've seen any of the posters coming out, if you've seen the trailer, is that this film is Rocket Raccoon's movie. This movie is central to him. You can tell when you see the marketing that this film is going to have a lot of heart and emotion when it comes to his character. And I can go ahead and say that that is absolutely true. This is an emotional film, easily maybe the most emotional of the three Guardians of the Galaxy films, and one of the most emotional films in the franchise up to this point in terms of the entire MCU in recent years. Overall, I was really riveted by Rocket Raccoon's story, as this film does dive into his past and how he came to be who he is. And what I'll say as a trigger warning is, if you're somebody who really struggles with animal cruelty in films, there is going to be an element of this film that's going to be hard to watch, I won't lie. And they definitely go for it. And I think that's part of what I really enjoyed about this film, is that the movie is fun, it's funny, it's got the big action, but it's also got a lot of emotion and heart, and at times really goes there with some of these really dark themes and these really serious situations, not really holding back. Now, this isn't some gore fest that's showing you every little bit, but even implication in certain scenes is really impactful. And I think that this film and James Gunn's direction, as well as the cast overall, do a great job to really relay the severity and the stakes in these situations, which is what I really enjoyed about this movie the most. I didn't really care that this movie was going to have big changes to the overall MCU or connective tissue to everything else. I wanted it to be a movie about the characters, and that's what this movie is. It's a personal journey for all of our characters, where everybody has time to shine and everybody kind of has to learn to work with one another again. I love that 3 movies into this franchise, there are still things these characters are consistently learning about, not only each other, but themselves. And I think that that's where this film really shined. You have the emotional side of the story when it comes to things like Rocket Raccoon, but you also have the rest of the characters having to go on this journey of self-discovery, as well as discovering one another in a new way. And on top of that, again, you have the big fun action, you have the big sci-fi fantasy elements that, if you're a big fan of fantasy and you're a big fan of Marvel and these characters, then there's so much fun to be had here. I think if you're a fan of the first film and the second film, or just a fan of these characters across all the different installments of the MCU that they've appeared in, there's a lot of fun to be had here. There's a lot of moments that are going to get you really riled up emotionally, both in an excited way and in a sad way and in an angry way. And overall, I was just really encapsulated in the story, specifically focused on our main heroes, as I thought that they all really brought it in this film. And one thing that I was actually going into this film a little bit concerned about was the introduction of this iteration of GAMORA, because obviously, spoilers for what's come before, GAMORA died in Infinity War, which was a huge part of that narrative. But then a GAMORA from a different timeline, of course, reappears in Endgame, who doesn't really have the connections to this iteration of the Guardians. And she's in this film, as you can see in the marketing, the posters, the trailers, and all that jazz. And I was thinking to myself, this is something that I'm kind of worried about moving forward with the multiverse, that if somebody dies, you can just replace them. But I do think that they utilize this iteration of GAMORA in the film to really kind of, again, keep up with the character development across the board, specifically when it comes to the character of Star-Lord, and I really enjoyed the time spent with the two of them on screen. There's a lot of humor that comes with it, but there's also some great character moments that come with it, and Zoe Saldana was great in the role once again. Now let's talk about our villains, because they were definitely a big part of this movie. Our main villain in the film is the High Evolutionary, played by Chukwudi Iwuji, I believe it's how you pronounce his name, and I thought he gave a great performance. I thought he was very menacing and just power hungry, while also wanting to control small things, and definitely one of the more memorable villains in recent Marvel movies. I really enjoyed his presence on screen. I really enjoyed the menace of his character as well, specifically for the character of Rocket Raccoon, and overall I just thought that he was definitely a very strong part of this movie that gave the characters stakes. Was he a really crazy, unstoppable villain that's, you know, gonna come up in the top tier of MCU villains that are a huge, like, complete threat to the entire civilization in the world? Maybe not so much, but I did really enjoy his presence in the narrative and how impactful he was as a villain when it came down to the personal parts of this story. And then if you remember, in the post-credit scenes of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, there was a post-credit scene setting up the character of Adam Warlock, which got me really excited when I first saw that movie, because Adam Warlock is one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel comic book line. And so going into this movie, when I saw that Will Poulter was going to be playing the character and he was finally making a full-on appearance on screen in this movie, I was incredibly excited. I was also very worried to see what they would do, and unfortunately this is where my biggest gripe of the film comes in, was when it comes to Adam Warlock. While I enjoyed his presence in the film and I thought they had fun with the character and some of his fish out of water elements, and I thought Will Poulter was good in the role, I don't think that they ever fully utilized the character throughout the course of the film, often kind of leaving him to be a comedic character or just a comedic threat, less so than an actual menacing threat that he typically is in the comic books or can be. And so in the case of this storyline, it often felt like they didn't know 100% what to do with Adam Warlock. However, I didn't hate his introduction into the film. I didn't hate his appearance and his time spent on screen. I just often felt like they were kind of underutilizing him and using him far more for comedy than actually for anything story-based. And I mentioned all the great action here, but action can sometimes just be stale unless you have great cinematography. And Henry Braham, who did the cinematography here, I thought brought a lot to this film. There are some great action sequences in this film that are so well shot that of course are really helped by the fact that you have fantastic special effects that are being added to these sequences, but there's some great shots of these characters that really highlight just how badass these characters are. And there's a great hallway scene where the Guardians are working together to take down a bunch of enemies, and the cinematography in that scene as well as all the special effects that work together with the choreography, I thought was really solid, and the cinematography was almost a character in a sequence like that. And then I definitely want to praise the composer of this film, John Murphy, who recently worked with James Gunn on some other comic book related things, specifically the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special that went to Disney Plus this past year, as well as the Suicide Squad, the DC film that James Gunn also wrote and directed. And he's done other films like 28 Weeks Later, as well as things like Kick-Ass, and overall I really enjoyed the musical score here that brought some new music to the franchise while also reprising the themes of the Guardians that we know and love from the previous films. Overall, I think if you're a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, if you're a fan of Star-Lord, Gamora, Groot, Drax, and Mantis, and the rest of the gang, I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. There's a lot more characters that are introduced, and this definitely sets up a new wave of where the Guardians are going moving forward. For anybody interested, there are 2 post-credit scenes in this film. One is a mid-credit scene, and there's one at the very tail end. I think there's a lot of fun little Easter eggs and references over the course of the film as well. And what I will say is that if you have not already seen the holiday special that came out on Disney Plus this previous year, I think it's only like 35 or 40 minutes. It's not a very long special. However, the events of that are referenced here in small ways, even in just dialogue, that I feel like it helps kind of transition a little bit from where we saw the Guardians last before we saw this movie. And overall, I thought that that was a nice touch. I'm glad that they at least referenced the events in some way of the holiday special to kind of, you know, help elevate the story here in its own way. So yeah, guys, that's going to be my thoughts without getting into deep spoilers. If you guys are interested in a full spoiler review or something like that, leave some comments down below. If there's enough comments and enough support for that, I'll definitely do something like that. If not, whatever the case may be, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Did you guys enjoy this film? Did you not enjoy this film? Were you able to get behind the characters a lot more than you did in the second film? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you thought about this third installment into the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, and how do you feel about this James Gunn send-off in its own way. Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.